Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond. You can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And you can also hear this show rebroadcast later on in the week on Fridays on a host of other stations, so lots of different ways to listen to the show. Quickly, of course, if you want to support my work, you can go to Patreon, patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber. Well, I am not going to talk any more than I need to, because I am very excited about my guest today. We have on a living legend, someone I have admired from afar, and I think I want to say this might be one of our biggest guests, and that is Douglas Valentine. And Doug, for anyone out there who isn't aware of who Doug Valentine is, he is the author of several very influential books, including the Phoneix Program, which we'll definitely be touching on later on in this episode. And the Phoneix Program, of course, discusses the CIA's particular brand of terrorism that they perfected in Vietnam. Doug also wrote The Strength of the Wolf, which is an amazing book, which I recommend to people constantly, and I've referenced on the show before, which deals with the CIA's infiltration of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. But I will stop rambling on and welcome Doug onto the show. Doug, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me on the show.
Excellent.
I don't know how I'm going to live up to that.
Well, no, don't worry, you will. But but really, Doug, you have been a hero of mine. Someone every time you have an article up, I always just consume it quickly right then and there. I still, for some reason, I always still to this day point people to an excellent article you wrote a little while back on Counterpunch, dissecting Daniel Ellsberg, which I always manage to point people to. Anytime they bring up Daniel Ellsberg, you really should check out this article, because it might change your opinion on Daniel Ellsberg. And that article also introduced me to the term swordsman, which I had not been too familiar with until you mentioned it in that article, and it always sort of gives me a chuckle. So thank you for that. But of course, I have Doug on today to discuss your latest book, The CIA as Organized Crime, and this is out right now. You can go to Doug's website, douglasvalentine.com, and pick up a copy of the book, which we will, of course, link up to in the show notes. But, Doug, why don't you kind of explain a little bit about why you decided to write The CIA as Organized Crime? What is this book? Because it, in many ways, seems like a kind of a culmination of a lot of stuff that you have been writing about over the years.
Well, generally, up until this book, I had never really used a personal pronoun in any of my books. Nothing about me, but a couple of people, including the editor and publisher at Clarity Press, Diana Collier, had been after me for years to do something like this, and kept saying no, and I kept saying no. But Diana went out and actually picked a bunch of old interviews that I'd done and a bunch of articles, and she said, well, if you would just update this, all these things, I'll put them into a book. And so that's how it got to be about sort of this comprehensive review of everything I've written, and to try to put it into perspective of how I actually got access to the CIA, and how some of the things that I talk about I actually came to understand, which in doing it, kind of was an awakening for me too. I mean, I hadn't really reviewed my own processes, and so it was helpful for me too. But I think it kind of personalizes and contextualizes the scope of my research over 30 years, and it breaks down the book into the CIA into four general areas. The Phoneix Program, which is basically terrorism, counterterrorism and terrorism being the same thing, which is something I explain. And then there's the CIA and drugs. When I was writing the Phoneix Program book in the late 80s, and the Phoneix Program was a CIA program in Vietnam, I kept hearing about Golden Triangle Industries and the CIA's involvement in drug trafficking. Those two, my next two books, Strength of the Wolf and Strength of the Pack, derive from that. A lot of the contacts I made in the CIA helped me to get contacts within the old Bureau of Narcotics and the DEA. The third part is about how Phoneix and the war on drugs come home and are manifest in the Department of Homeland Security and the bureaucratic systems that have been set up since 9/11. And this was something I predicted back in 1990 what would happen. And when 9/11 occurred, I had this incredible amount of material that I was able to just start writing a whole lot of articles about, to try and put 9/11 into a bigger context rather than, simply one terror incident, which people tended to focus on. But if you put it into its historical perspective, it means something different. And then the fourth is the overriding context, which is the CIA's relationship with the media. And it's pretty much a fallacy to think of the CIA as different than the media. They are the same thing. And I try to show how they're basically the same people. They went to the same schools. They go to the same parties. The people the publishers and the top editors and the people who run the CIA and the military and basically the highest ranking people in every part of the bureaucracy and the executive branch and the judicial branch. Well, maybe not so much the judicial branch. Certainly, the judicial branch in terms of the Department of Justice. But all these people at the highest level are basically the same group, and any distinctions between them are really artificial, and they have the same objectives, and they have the same they put the same management and organizational systems in place in order to weed out anybody who they can assimilate ideologically, and they reject anybody. You're not going to get into the CIA or the DEA or rise to a position of power in the New York Times if you're a leftist, or if you believe in social justice or income equality. I mean, you're going to get weeded out from any of these bureaucracies before you get to a management position, and by the time that you get to the top, they're all the same. And so I try to make that clear in the fourth part of this book, and then there's a little introduction about how I came to get my access.
Well, I would actually like to briefly explore a little bit about how you got your access, because that is you could probably write a whole book all about that. In preparation, for our conversation. You sent me some wonderful documents that you got from the CIA, from their files on you, where they speak quite candidly about their fear of you and of what you were doing. There's some really wonderful quotes from the Publications Review Board of the CIA, where they're, freaking out over what you're doing, your research, that you are somehow, you're getting so close to kind of, spilling all of the beans. They're like, every week they've got some new, Jesus Christ, this guy Valentine he's doing this, he's doing that. So, Doug, explain a little bit about your history with the Central Intelligence Agency, and maybe even the lawsuit that you had to initiate in order to get some of these files. And also, if you could touch a little bit on your relationship or experience with former Director William Colby.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was just saying before about the CIA and the media being the same people. And if I had gone to the Columbia School of Journalism and I had come up through the system, if I had been a journalist and I had worked at, a local paper for a while, and then I'd hit the big time and I'd gone to the Washington Post and I'd started out on the crime beat. And then, I did a couple of good articles and they put me in national security. By the time I got to a guy like William Colby, I would have been so indoctrinated and so trained that I simply repeated everything that he said to me in the format that he gave it to me. But that isn't how I got to the CIA. I'm a college dropout. I'm 67. My father was a World War II veteran. We didn't talk to each other for 10 years, when I started college. And we didn't actually form a relationship until I was 30, when he had his second open heart surgery. And he was 55 at the time. He was a blue collar worker. He worked 2 jobs. Worked nights for the post office, and then always had a job either running the movie theater or working at a liquor store. Just worked himself to death. So I come from that envelope. My mother had a job too, but always worked. But when I was 30, my career as a climbing trees came to an end with a knee injury, and my father had just had his second open heart surgery, and when he was recovering, they had to put him he was in intensive care. They had to move him out of intensive care because his nightmares were so bad it was disturbing the other patients. And they told him that he had to, they brought in a hospital psychiatrist, and they said if he wanted to get better, he had to unburden himself about what happened to him in World War II. So he called me up and he said, Doug, I got a story to tell you. I know you want to be a writer. Come on home. And I tape recorded his recollections and his story. And that was my first book, which came out in 1984, called The Hotel Tocloban. And it was about my father's experiences in World War II, in combat in New Guinea, and later as a prisoner of war in the Philippines. And things happened to him which were very unusual. And he was actually compelled by the military not to say what happened to him in World War II. And those things, they call it PTSD. Those things directly contributed to his heart trouble. Mm-hmm. If you have to hold in secrets that, impact your life and the direction of your life, it can be damaging. And there's an awful lot of people walking around, especially veterans, who have that problem. So after I finished that book, I wanted to write a book about Vietnam veterans. And I wanted to see if they had these similar kind of problems. So I went to a VA hospital, and I said to the guy, is there an aspect of the Vietnam War that is secret? And he said, the Phoneix Program. I said, well, what's that? I didn't know much. And, he said, well, there's a guy here who was in special forces. He's sorry about that. He was, in this VA hospital, and, the director said he'd get me an interview with him and he'd tell me all about Phoneix. A couple of days later, he called me up and he said, the guy won't talk to you. He's afraid if he tells you about the Phoneix program, he'll lose his VA benefits. So it was the same thing as my father. And I really wanted to find out what Phoneix was about. And not having come up through the system, I went and I read a little bit about Phoneix, and I found out that this guy, former director of Central Intelligence, William Colby, was the person most associated with the program. He had basically run it in Vietnam for a couple of years, and he had testified to Congress very, favorably about the Phoneix program in 71 and 72, and then again in 73 during his confirmation hearings for DCI. And so, like I say, not knowing any better, having come from left field, I wrote Colby a letter and sent him a copy of my book, The Hotel Talk Low, and said, I'd like to write a book about the Phoneix program. Will you help me? And he read the book, and he liked it, and he said, sure, come on down. And I met him at his law office on K Street or M Street, I can't remember where, but he was in a big fancy law firm lobbying Congress, and overthrow, those big time law firms are overthrowing governments with the CIA all over the world. That's what he was doing in his second career. Anyway, he liked the book because, first of all, it showed that I understood what it meant to be a soldier. And at the time, there was the generation gap, and the CIA officers like Colby weren't getting along with their own sons. Mm-hmm. And all these old time CIA guys, they all loved the Hotel Talk Club, and the fact that my father had been a good soldier, that I understood, and all these CIA guys consider themselves soldiers. The CIA is a very military organization. Somebody tells you what to do, you salute and you do it. And most of them come from the military. Colby himself had parachuted in France in World War II at the OSS. And so they felt I would understand them and what it means to be in combat. And not only combat, but because my father had been a prisoner of war, what it means to be behind the enemy lines and to doing these kind of, military intelligence, special operations kind of things. And because I was coming from left field, they felt I would give it a fresh perspective, that it could be something really cool. So Colby I met him again at his place in Georgetown. I met his second wife, and he started introducing me to people. And one of the first people he introduced me to was a guy named Evan Parker, who had been with Colby in the OSS, had joined the CIA right when it was formed. Like Colby, they had worked together for years and years. They knew each other intimately. And when Phoneix was formed, Colby appointed this guy, Evan Parker, to be the first director of the Phoneix program. So in a minute, I had access to the inside. And when I went to see this guy Parker, it was something that happened over and over and over again with me. I'm kind of a good looking waspy kind of guy. I've read a lot, so I have I understand a lot of different subjects. I'm well spoken. I was a Methodist, so I know how to show respect to my elders. And I just have this way about me that was very informal, but at the same time respectful, that they really liked. And Parker met me, and we at the door, and he was kind of this avuncular guy. He just had a stroke. And we walked upstairs to his den, which was filled with books on Welsh poetry and Welsh history, and we just talked about Dylan Thomas and Welsh mythology for about an hour. And he had this little coffee table, and there was a folder on it. And he said, Doug, I'm gonna go downstairs and make us some tea and get us some cookies. I'll be gone about 15 minutes. And he left the room. And I opened up this folder, and there was a roster of the staff of the Phoneix Directorate when it was created, with the names of like 5, 6 CIA officers who were on it, all the military intelligence officers, the State Department officers, and their social security number and their rank and all this stuff, and I just started furiously writing down this information. And like 15 minutes later, he calls up from downstairs. He goes, "Doug, I'm coming up." So I put away my notes and I closed the folder, and he comes in with a wink in his eye, and that kind of thing happened over and over and over again with me, where because Colby had sent me and because they liked me, they just felt that they could tell me everything. And I approached the subject totally organizationally. I never once asked anybody, "Well, did you shoot somebody? Or did you recruit some, great agent or something like that?" I just went about the whole thing organizationally. And they liked that. And it was like presenting a blank slate to these guys. And as they got to like me, they just blurted everything that was, they got tired with the organizational stuff and they wanted to get to the good stuff, and they just started telling me. Now, if you go to the Columbia School of Journalism, you're not supposed to write about that stuff. But I didn't know that. And as I went along and I got all this anecdotal information as well as organizational material, I realized I was in a position to start pitting these guys against each other. And I got this rat-a-tat going. There's all these factions in the CIA, and one guy would say, like, and of course I had to deal with Bob Wall, and talking to walls like talking to a wall, and he would tell me all the stupid, horrible things Wall did. And I'd go to Wall and I said, "Well, this is what Brickham said about you," and he'd hit the ceiling. And so I got this rat-a-tat going, and that's at the point that they started watching me and getting hip to what I was doing, and guys were writing into the CIA and telling them what I was up to. And later when I got my file, they were saying, they're calling me Bad News Valentine, and they said I had acquired enough information to do damage to the CIA, and it was true. And at that point, they made one last effort. Actually, I did go to see a guy at the end named Bob Wall, and he was instrumental in creating the Phoneix Program. He was a CIA officer who was up near the demilitarized zone in Da Nang, which, if you know anything about Vietnam, is at the tippy top of South Vietnam, right next to North Vietnam. So it was a really busy area. And he came up with this idea for something that he called DIOCs, District Intelligence and Operations Coordinating Centers, which the guy who created Phoneix actually used as one of the foundation stones for the Phoneix program. These IOCs, Intelligence Operations Coordinating Centers, are the model for the fusion centers, which the Department of Homeland Security was based on. And it had to do with counterinsurgency, insurgencies, intelligence operations, paramilitary operations. The guys who put all this stuff together, created this it derives from systems theory. It's very sophisticated kind of stuff. And Wall contributed to it. When I got to see him, it was at the end of my research. And he was explaining his role. And when we finished the interview, we went, he lived in Maryland, Rockville, Maryland. He had this little split level ranch. I was parked in the driveway, and we walked down to the garage, down the steps, and we came out of the garage, and we were standing there. And he said, I run a youth leadership program for the CIA in my retirement. And, we know what you're doing. We know how much information you gather. If you let us review your book and edit it, we'll get you a job on the Senate Armed Services Committee as a staff researcher. And your starting salary will be, at the time, which was phenomenal, like $80,000 a year. And this is like 1987. And they had made some passes at me before. But, again, I'm a blue collar guy. They're waving money in front of me. It doesn't matter. That's not why I did the whole thing. And I said, well, thanks, Bob, but I'm kind of independent and I like to work for myself and I really don't do good in organizations. Thanks, no thanks. Just to put that in and then after that, all the doors closed and a lot of access was denied to me at that point. But I should stress that the CIA packs congressional committees with willing youth doing their work for them. And one of the guys I interviewed, a CIA officer named Rob Simmons, who later became a congressman from Connecticut. He came in 2000 and was there in 2001 and was instrumental in creating the Department of Homeland Security. He was a Republican, 75 or 80% of all the CIA guys, they're all right wingers. And if they're Democrats, they're Clinton neoliberal fascist kind of Democrats. There's not actually any liberal people. Anyway, this guy, Simmons, left the CIA in 1979. He went to Yale and took a course in public administration. And I write about this in my new book. And in 1980, he got a job on the Senate Armed Services Committee as their director of research, as the senior staffer. And in that position, he authored the Agent Identity Act, which was passed in 1982 and made it illegal to name CIA officers. Mm-hmm. That is how it works. And I try to explain this, how the CIA has, what I call it, the organized crime branch of the United States government, because they've infiltrated every facet of the United States government. Whether it doesn't matter whether it's the legislative branch, the only people on the committees that have the security clearance to read CIA documents are former CIA officers. And generally they're not even really, quote, former CIA officers. There's a CIA officer who are taking a sabbatical to go and do the CIA's dirty work in Congress. And the congressmen are so busy ripping and tearing and stealing your tax dollars that they don't care that some CIA staffer is saying, drawing up legislation, which they never read, and putting it in front of them and saying, pass this. That's how the Patriot Act got written and presented to Congress and passed in like lickety split before you could blink. These things are years in the making, and they come out of the CIA, and it's how they control legislation, and they do the same thing in every branch of the government. Anyway, so that's how I got the access. Obviously there's a lot more to it, but once I had it and I wrote the book and the book came out, that's when the CIA started striking back. And I remember at the time the book came out, Peter Dale Scott said to me, you're never going to get another book published in the United States, but you have joined the club, and it's a very marginalized bunch of people. If you break the rules and you step out of line and you actually tell what's really going on, well, you're going to be a marginal character for the rest of your life. And the way they, put the emphasis on it was, I got a half-page review, the Phoneix Program book in the New York Times, when it came out. The review was written by Morley Seyfried. Killed the book in its cradle. And, because the New York Times book review section, which is heavily influenced by the CIA, is what the intelligentsia in the United States looks to, not only for direction, but for the language to use in talking about things. And the CIA is very good at presenting these whether it's a book review or a government communique, the language that they want people to use, and they get people in the media to use that language. And the unsuspecting intelligentsia reads something in the New York Times book review and they say, oh, I like that word, or I like the way he said that. I'm going to use that, and then they just like repeat verbatim what they read. And Morley Safer said things about the book, and they're all basically untrue, but there it was, and the book was dead. And 25 years later, I was fully expecting this. I knew that something like this was going to happen. But it wasn't until last year that I found out that Colby and Morley Safer were friends in Vietnam. And Colby's like this godfather. He had said to Safer, and Safer revealed this at something called the American Enterprise Institute, or it was called the American Experience, and it was put on by the State Department, and then it was a bunch of guys from the Vietnam Press Corps. And they were reliving their experiences. Negroponte was there. Richard Holbrook was there. All these guys had been in Vietnam in the early mid-60s, like Dan Ellsberg. And who, by the way, that article came out in 2003, and it talks about Ellsberg's relationship with the CIA and work with the CIA. Anyway, Colby calls up Safer in Vietnam one day, and he says, can you go away for 3 days? Can you disappear for 3 days? And everybody at this conference laughs. Ha, 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 disappear, CIA. And Colby took Safer around, took him to all the regional and province offices, introduced him to all the CIA officers who were working in Vietnam at the time, introduced him to the Gulag archipelago of interrogation centers that the CIA had set up as one of the foundation stones of the Phoneix Program. They had set up an interrogation center in each of the 44 provinces, working with the special police, and they built them. They hired Pacific Architects and Engineers, a company out in California, to build all these interrogation centers, which are the model for its black sites and things that it does all over the world. And he took Safer to all meet all the guys who ran the counterterror teams, the hit teams that went off and killed the civilian members of the insurgency. And I should add that it was the civilians who were being run through these interrogation centers. This had nothing to do with guerrillas or the military. These were like Gestapo tactics, these hit teams were like the Einsatzgruppen, the SS groups that roamed around getting rounding up the resistance in France, and exactly the same thing. And Colby introduced Safer to all these people, showed them how the whole thing works, and at this conference, he said, and I still feel inhibited about talking about any of it to this day. I still feel I have to keep it all secret. Well, that's what my book was about. It detailed all these things. I did not feel any prohibition about talking with this stuff, and of course that's why they hated me. But Colby was like the godfather, and with that, one day he does a favor for the Undertaker, and he says, someday, I don't do the Italian accent. Someday I'm going to ask you to do a favor, and when my book came out, Colby called up Safer. He said, well, it's time for you to do me the favor. And that's how it works too. And when I say these people at the highest level, whether they're in the media or the government or the CIA, they're all the same people, and they all have owe each other favors, and they all have the same exact, they all believe the same story about what it means to be an American, and they consider the rest of us, the working class people, to just be fodder for this self-aggrandizing mill that they've set up between the corporations and the government, and they just reap incredible benefits from it. And the secret is keeping it all secret. It's like I quote this guy Guy Debord in the book who said, secrecy is at the heart of domination, especially the secret of domination. You know, I mean, how they dominate us is what they keep secret. And if you go and if you explain this, it's like looking at something that you've seen all your life, but just seen it in a new light. And really, all the facts are there. Everything is there for anybody to see. I mean, if you have the time to go out and research and read this stuff, and when it comes to the CIA, my books will help you to see what the CIA does. But it's really all quite obvious and it's all quite there. And the only thing that keeps us from knowing it is that the government institutes official secrecy and the media goes along with it.
No, it's so true. Also, what you're saying, it is in your face. It is right there if you go to look at it. And you know, we were talking before we started, and you right before my music came on, you asked what my specialty is, and I would say one of the big ones is researching the relationship between the CIA and Hollywood, and which is growing at an alarming rate. And you know, it's more of the evidence that it's right there in front of you. They're taking an incredible amount of Hollywood films way too seriously. They're way too involved on a sort of global scale in manipulating these films, in rewriting certain things. So they're very concerned with our own perceptions. And again, the sort of the deception of what the CIA is, what the CIA does. And Doug, you use the term organized crime, which I think obviously conjures up the idea of the mafia or something of that ilk. But it also, I think, kind of creates the image again that this is a very complex, far-reaching organization. This isn't just about intelligence. This isn't just about war. This is about controlling politics, banking, corporations, culture, lots of, there's just so many different aspects to this. How do you see the CIA developing since you first started looking into it, and say, from the Phoneix Program onwards? Because I wonder, is it still, in your opinion, is it still kind of this kind of old boys club, a lot of Ivy League type people, or has it changed over time? Has it become something different from what you originally knew it as?
Well, yes and no. And it hasn't become more liberal, that's for sure. But if you look at the historical arc, again, it sort of clarifies itself. When the CIA started in 1947, 48, it was unusual to get on a plane and fly overseas. International airlines were just starting up. People were still taking boats. Now you can get on a plane and you can go anywhere. And in 12 hours you can be on the other side, and it's not unusual, I say that as a metaphor for the CIA. It's the same thing. When Graham Greene was this old Brit writer, and he wrote a book called The Quiet American, and to get back to what you just said. And they made it into a movie. The book talks about how a CIA officer in Saigon in 1952 is operating undercover as part of a medical team. Okay? And he's dispensing medicines to the peasants. And at the same time, he's running agent operations. And he's trying to solidify the United States position, and he's backing certain Vietnamese against others. And he actually, with C4 explosives, detonates a bomb in the major square in Saigon and makes it look like an act of terrorism as a way of shaping the political environment. And the main character in Graham Greene's story knows that the CIA guy did that and arranges for him to be killed. That's the story in a nutshell. Apart from the fact that the CIA is still doing that today, but it's doing it in ways that are comparable to getting on a plane in Pan Am in 1948 and flying to Rome, as opposed to getting on a jet and flying to, today. I mean, they have become much more technologically efficient at doing these things. Whereas in the old days they relied on a few people, now they have, as I explained, perfected the organizational and management systems so that they're less likely to be glitches. They're just as technology has been streamlined, the bureaucratic systems that are in place have been streamlined as well. There didn't used to be federal laws making it illegal to name a CIA officer. That didn't happen until 1982. And Phil Agee wrote a book and named like 5 million of them, and they couldn't, all they could do was try to, was chase them to Cuba. So just as they're more efficient now than they were then, at the same time, nothing has changed because the official that Graham Greene was basing this book on, or a composite character, was a guy named Ed Lansdale. And Lansdale went to Hollywood and he arranged in like 1953, or when the movie came out, 54, for the screenwriter and the producer and the director to turn the CIA guy into a hero. I mean, and Graham Greene sold the rights to his book to these people in Hollywood. Now, once you've sold the rights, they can do whatever with the book they want. And they just rewrote it so that the Viet Cong were the bad guys who set off the terrorism. Well, that's what's happening every day, minute to minute in the world right now. Only whereas Ed Lansdale, had to, send a telex or actually walk over or something. Now they do it instantaneously. And not only that, and the most important thing to understand is that the CIA has had 70 years to work with Hollywood to develop a story. And I talk about this in this book. It goes back to Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, and how the ruling class 2,500 years ago realized that if it wanted to solidify its control over the lower classes, they had to hire scribes and give them stories to write based on mythology, which would cement in the public's mind that the ruling class are noble people and heroic, and that they only fight good wars, and even if they fight a bad war, it's fate that made it all screw up, and it was the gods. And it wasn't really them wanting to rape and pillage Troy and take everything it had, like when Bush went into Iraq. It's we're doing it for something good. And that mythology is what informs the American public and our ideas about what it means, like getting back to my father in World War II, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a hero, what it means to be a leader. And all these stories that we've grown up believing are just total BS. And since the advent of, CinemaScope and the internet and cable TV, the CIA and its writers have just perfected this story. And they've made it more believable, and it's been more solidified in the American public and the general consciousness, so that it's just harder and harder and harder for anybody to break out of it. I mean, luckily there's, women and blacks have a voice nowadays, and you can even go to RT, Russia Today, and get their side of the story. So what you see, and I think to some extent what we're seeing with Trump is actually that those stories and those myths beginning to the foundations of those stories beginning to shake a bit. And believe me when I say the CIA is doing everything it can, as are all the other powerful elite people in this country, to keep you believing that they have your best interests at heart and they're heroes and soldiers are heroes who aren't like in my father in this POW camp, fragging their officers or killing their officers like they did left and right in Vietnam. That it really is all together and it all is for truth and democracy. Well, anything you can do to chip away at that story is the biggest and most important thing you can do, because it's just a lot of bulk. You're talking about Hollywood is exactly what's happening.
Oh, and it's, the relationship is now become so solidified. I mean, there's almost no distinction, between the way that, the CIA has ingratiated itself with certain actors, directors, screenwriters. I mean, you've got people whose careers are now predicated on the fact that they made a CIA assisted film, which got them this job, which that, and, this and that. And suddenly they're speaking at the UN. They're touted as having some sort of opinion that should matter to everyone. What they say is gospel. So but I know what you mean. Etching away at that is so important, which is partly why and of course beating up on Hollywood liberals for supporting the CIA is always fun. So you got to do that as well. Doug, kind of on that again on the sort of evolution of the CIA. Clearly, they've never stopped hating Russia. That seems to still be kind of their ultimate goal. Even this sort of shift into Islamic terrorism is very much focused at Russian interests and Chinese interests as well to a degree. What do you make of the sort of recent intelligence reports on the Russian hacking and whatnot? Because I wonder, is the CIA really quite so concerned about the influence that Russia has here in America, or is this sort of a distraction? Is this a kind of divide and conquer type tactic? Get people yelling at one another over this. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's both things. Okay, and this is one of the strengths of the CIA. For example, just trying to give an example to make it clear. When they went into Vietnam, like they do in any country, the CIA, and the CIA has a station in every country. They have a station in Moscow. They have a lot of agents running around in Moscow. They have a station in Ukraine, in London, in every country in the world. What they try to do is influence every political party in that country. It's not that they're just supporting the fascists. They try to infiltrate the leftists too. And it's, I talk a lot about that in this book, the idea of courting the compatible left. This is how they weaned in Europe, where the communists had basically been the only force left fighting the Nazis. Everybody else had gone over and teamed up with them, Vichy France. As countries fell, they all lined up. The communists were the only ones fighting. And of course, the communists always got their direction from the Kremlin. So it goes back to that. And starting after World War II, the CIA made this really big effort to court the compatible left, to bring to create what were called social democratic parties around the world that would accept trade unions that were run by the communists, that were liberal and all this kind of stuff. And that was their biggest way of fighting Soviet communism was by not getting behind the fascists with it, which you don't have to worry about because they're, like William Buckley used to be, or, Fox News is today. The CIA doesn't have to tell anybody at Fox News what to say. Those people know what to say. It's got to work on the people that are in the margins. So the same thing is going on in Russia today. Now that the Soviet Union has splintered and a lot of those, the former Soviet states are now their own independent republics. Some are part of the Russian Federation, some aren't, but that's where the CIA does its work. And it does its work through guys like Rex Tillerson, whom, Trump has tapped to be his Secretary of State. Now, Tillerson's this guy that works for Exxon, right? A really big time, guy at Exxon who's been mucking around Russia, trying to get Exxon into the oil market there, forever. Well, if you don't think this guy Rex Tillerson has CIA contacts up the gazoon, you don't understand what the CIA does. So for the CIA to be doing one thing on the one hand, and what apparently is the opposite on the other hand, that's standard operating procedure for the CIA. They're trying to cover all the bases, have their finger in every pie, have influence everywhere so that they can manipulate and shape the political environment in every country that the United States is operating in, and they do it in every possible way. And it's really important to understand that about the CIA. The military wants to start a fight. Because if you go to West Point and you want to become a general, you have to be in a battle, and you have to show that you can, so the military is slightly different. They're also trying to, through their intelligence services, like that big base they have in Turkey, that affects the mere presence of such a big base in Turkey affects the political climate in Turkey. And so the military's trying to affect the political climate in foreign countries as well. They do it through their bases and the agent nets that they set up that operate outside their bases and through the military attaches and stuff like that. But the CIA is dealing with all these civic institutions. And in every country, they're dealing through the civic institution, police, security forces. Every country is a different, it's like, I don't know if you watch football, but Bill Belichick, the coach of the New England Patriots, has been successful for 15 years because he plays what's called situational football. His team adapts to any situation. Well, that's what the CIA is doing, and it has its hand in every pot. So, to me, the message that they're trying to send to the United States, is always the same. They're looking for consistency. They want to present this story that we talked about. What they're doing overseas is oftentimes the polar opposite. In fact, it usually is the polar opposite because otherwise it wouldn't need to be a secret. They would have to keep what they're doing secret, So don't get too hung up in what it appears to be. Just understand what the CIA does, and then again, it all becomes clear.
Oh, yeah, no, completely agree with you there. And we are coming up on the break right now. I'll try and see if Doug can stick around with us for a little bit longer. And remember, you can find his new book, The CIA as Organized Crime, at douglasvalentine.com.
I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Are you feeling embarrassed and stuck because you can't focus or concentrate? I have a confession to make. I spent years unable to think clearly, like I was in a fog. I was going through the motions, running my companies, and I hated feeling groggy and mentally sluggish. I couldn't get ahead like this. It's no secret the powers that be want us dumbed down. Chemicals, fluoride, our brains are under siege, and we are experiencing lower IQs. But now there's a weapon to fight back and win. Introducing DNA Evolve, a revolutionary breakthrough in a category of cognitive enhancers called nootropics. I've been using DNA Evolve and couldn't feel better. For me, it works. It feels great to get things done again and get ahead. Try a free sample for yourself at DNAEvolveSample.com. That's DNAEvolveSample.com. Supplies are limited, so go to DNAEvolveSample.com right now.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of micro plant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media, not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us with free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scam.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shills and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City. Your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you're just joining us right now, we are joined by Doug Valentine, the author of a brand new book, The CIA as Organized Crime. And Doug has given us a little bit more of his time. He's going to join us for another 15 minutes or so. So thank you, Doug. And just a very quick shout out to this episode has, along with my regular producer, Danny, we have another producer credit, and that is to Hugo Turner, who goes by Hugo Turner 1969 on Twitter. You can follow him there. He's someone that I've known since I started the show very, very early on, big supporter, and he actually put Doug and I in contact. So thank you so much, Hugo, for everything you do. And we'll link up to his website as well. Some excellent articles, and hopefully we're going to get Hugo on very soon to discuss a recent article he wrote on Ted Shackley. But Doug is still with us, and we wanted to just sort of talk a little bit and flesh out a bit more about the connection between the Central Intelligence Agency and the narcotics trade, which is is a cornerstone of pretty much everything that they do, and in large part is what funds the CIA. And Doug, you've written two very lengthy books on this connection. So explain a little bit how did you go from the CIA to the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and later on to the DEA? What was your introduction to that?
Well, again, it was unusual, and I kind of lucked out. Earlier in the show, I talked about visiting Evan Parker, who was the first CIA director of the Phoneix Program, and how he showed me a roster of his original staff in the Phoneix Program staff, and how I copied all the names down. Well, one of the names was a guy named at the time was a Major Larry Tracy, and so I found him right away. He was still active duty military. He'd been promoted and was now colonel or something like that. And I said to him, "Hey, I'm interested in the Phoneix Program and the CIA in Vietnam." And he said, "Oh, you don't want to talk to me. You want to talk to Tully Okampor." And I said, "Well, who's Tully?" And he said, "Well, where are you?" And I said, "Well, I was in a motel room somewhere down in Washington, D.C. He said, "Well, here's his number, call him up." So I called up this guy, Tully Okampor, who I didn't know who he was. All I knew was that he was a colonel, and he came over. One of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life, but again, just sort of by luck that I got to him. And Tully was a World War II vet. He had actually led a group of Japanese Americans into combat. He worked with Douglas MacArthur in Shanghai. After World War II, he'd been MacArthur. He spoke Chinese, and he'd been MacArthur's liaison to the Kuomintang, to Chiang Kai-shek, and as a young guy, he met all the original OSS guys who were over there, and of course, the United States government had a history of supporting Chiang Kai-shek in China going back to the mid-1920s. And of course, Chiang Kai-shek supported himself totally by smuggling opium. But nevertheless, that sort of filters into this later on. But just to let you know that the United States government has been protecting and supporting major drug traffickers even before there was a CIA. And the CIA just merely institutionalized that practice. But Tully then served with he was in the military, but he spent his entire career detached to the CIA. And this is important to understand. The CIA has career officers who are what's called fully backstopped. They get the insurance policy, they get the retirement fund, but most of it's paramilitary people and the people in its special activities division who do a lot of the groundwork are soldiers. So they're military intelligence guys or special forces guys, who get attached to them for a period of time. And Tully was one of these guys who, starting in Korea, spent his whole career detached to the CIA while he kept getting promotions in the military. And of course he had military, it's called being double-hatted. He always had a boss in the military that he reported to administratively, but his operational bosses were in the CIA. Important thing to understand about how the military and the CIA work together. And Tully helped me to understand a lot of that. But starting from 1958 until 1966, he was assigned to Italy. And he worked as an advisor to the Italian Secret Services. And while he was there, he got to know a couple of members of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. They were also Italo-Americans. A guy named Charlie Siragusa, who was actually opened up the Bureau of Narcotics' first office in Rome in 1952. Him and Tully were best buddies. And then there was another guy named Henry Manfredi, who was also in Rome. Manfredi was actually a CIA officer posing as a member of the Bureau of Narcotics. The CIA can reach into any bureaucracy and get positions and then because people don't walk around the world saying, hi, I'm with the CIA. They always have credentials from, the State Department or the Agency for International Development or the Bureau of Narcotics or the DEA. So, Tully was best friends with Siragusa and Manfredi, and they worked together on joint CIA narcotic business. And given that the mafia is headquartered in Sicily, they had a lot of business. And Tully got to know the inside and outside of of course he'd been, working with the Kuomintang for years too. So Tully really understood how the CIA controls and manages the underworld narcotic business. And I can't get into all that now. It's in the books. So if you want to know the detail, just go to the books. But in 1966, there was this big scandal where it was discovered that Tully and his friends in the Italian Secret Service were writing up lists of communists to be knocked off. I mean, it was just like the Phoneix Program, and Tully was part of Gladio, that the stay behind networks that the CIA sets up in every country where it works. And he got kicked out of Italy in this scandal, and he got sent to Vietnam, which of course is the CIA was running the drug business out of the Golden Triangle and had an entire secret army in Laos, which was only secret because the New York Times didn't agree not to report about it. But it was there, this huge army, which was funding all its operations because it grew all sorts of opium, which it processed to heroin and sold to American soldiers in Vietnam. And to the mafia, guys like Santo Trafficante, who came out to Vietnam, and after the CIA put away the Corsicans, the mafia just started getting its own connections out of Vietnam, working for the CIA. And of course, Trafficante had been a narcotic trafficker since 1945, when he took over the business from his father. And the CIA had hired Trafficante to kill Fidel Castro, so he had the protection of the CIA, which is another thing that the CIA does all over the world. It hires narcotic traffickers to commit its assassinations, and then they get protected. This is exactly what's happening in Afghanistan today, only on a massive scale, as big a scale as happened in Vietnam. Anyway, Tully was at the center of all this stuff when he got to to Vietnam, he became a advisor to a major in what was called the police special branch, a guy named Win Mao, who he actually introduced me to. And Tully was very tight with the Vietnamese. He was one of the few CIA officers who actually introduced me to his counterparts. Most histories of Vietnam, you don't even know that the Vietnam exists. The Vietnamese exist. I mean, it's like every story that the CIA tells, the Iraqis or the Afghanis are just stick figures that are there to be shot by heroic Navy SEALs. You never actually get to know any of these people. But Tully knew them, and he loved them. And he had this operation, and when Colby set up Phoneix and put Evan Parker in place, Evan Parker took over Tully's office. And they kicked Tully out of business until Tully hated William Colby and Evan Parker. And he started telling me all the secrets about Phoneix from his perspective and the Vietnamese perspective. Plus which he became an advisor to a guy named General Loan. Loan was famous, if you know anything about the Vietnam War, as the guy who was photographed shooting a VC in the head.
Yes.
And that became a Pulitzer Prize winning picture for a guy named Eddie Adam. Tully had actually given this photographer permission to go with Loan that day. And, so that was another set. This was just like Rome all over again. Tully got in trouble again, and had to get rehabilitated for 2 years doing something else. And then he came back. But, Tully knew all about the drugs because Loan worked for a guy named Win Cao Ki, who was the biggest drug trafficker in Vietnam, and Loan had actually run his drug trafficking network. So through Tully, I got to understand all this stuff from the inside, plus which Tully introduced me to a guy named Andrew Tartaglino, who became the deputy director of the DEA, and Tartaglino, another Italo-American, was the protege of Siragusa and Manfredi. And so it was like William Colby sending me to Evan Parker. Tully sent me to Andrew Tartaglino, and the whole thing started all over again. And Tartaglino was very upset that the CIA had infiltrated the Bureau of Narcotics and and the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs and the DEA. And at that time, when I started interviewing guys like Tartaglino, they were still mad at the CIA for having infiltrated and taken over their organization. And when you asked about what's different nowadays, well, the guys in the 70s and the 80s were angry that the CIA was taking over the organization, and they were still resisting. Nowadays, the DEA is just an adjunct of the CIA. And when I talk about how things have not gotten any better, I mean they have gotten a hell of a lot worse, because now the CIA basically controls the DEA and its executive management and its intelligence operations and its special operations force. All these things through the same kind of systems theory that developed Phoneix 40 years ago, 50 years ago in Vietnam. Those systems have been perfected. So this whole Phoneix organizational and management structure that was set up has now been applied to the DEA. And I'll just close by saying, that it's really culminated. The CIA went through a reorganization in 2015, and it actually, at that time, it created its digital division, which of course is like Mr. Robot's Dark Army. It's just unbelievable, the sophistication and what they can do. They can create an entire history for an individual, things you've never done. They'll have photographs of you with a donkey in Tijuana. You've never been outside the country. That digital directorate is now the center of the CIA, along with a restructuring of what they call centers, which it now has about a dozen of, which are absolutely and totally modeled on the Phoneix Program, which it has set up around the world, which coordinate systematically all of its criminal activities, including its drug trafficking, and they're centered in these places run by targeting officers. With and one of the most important people in every one of these centers is their digital division guy, who makes sure that it's all compatible with the internet and whatever they want people to say. And they have their own servers, and it's just incredible how sophisticated and technocratic it is. And it encompasses the war on drugs now in a way that it used to rely on the goodwill of individual DEA officers that it recruited. It now runs these things systematically through perfected systems of indoctrination and information control. So it's just beyond anything you can imagine, but at the same time, as we talked about, it's all perfectly obvious what they're doing. I mean, in Afghanistan, the Taliban outlawed opium, and then the CIA took over, and now opium production is up 100 times what it had been, and nobody ever gets arrested. I mean, how much more obvious does it have to be?
Oh, you've got Hamid Karzai's brother, selling opium and pretty openly. I mean, he's not even that good at hiding it.
He eventually bumped him off when that scandal was about to percolate into the press, which is another thing that they,
Oh yeah,
that happens. And the brother actually lived in Baltimore, and was a character who's like the equivalent of that Turkish guy, Fethullah Gulen. Exactly. What they have. They keep a lot of these people here in the States and set them up in business here. And it's just like a big witness protection program for them.
And just quickly before I let you go, it's funny you're saying that they, when you look at like the Bureau of Narcotics, the CIA was relying on, a few people they could trust. And as you write in Strength of the Wolf, there were truly people that wanted to stop the flow of narcotics, or who genuinely were concerned, or however you feel about drug legalization, they did actually want to do their jobs. And then,
let me give you an example. I mean, I interviewed a guy named John Evans, who, like my father, had a couple of open heart surgeries. He was really on his last legs when his wife was mad because she was in the kitchen when we were talking, and the guy was getting all worked up. When you only have a third of a heart, it's just not a good thing. But she kept, shooting me an evil eye. But Evans had started out in the 40s and went into the Bureau of Narcotics and worked his way up. And in 1966, he got sent to Washington, D.C. as an assistant to the Bureau's of Narcotics Enforcement Assistant, okay? Headquarters at the time had maybe 10, 15 people. That's it. The whole Bureau at that time had 300 people. There's 600 agents and DEA agents in New York City alone. Anyway, so he gets to headquarters, and they put him in charge of foreign operations. It was a one-man job. He was getting all the memos that were coming from, at that time they had 16 agents overseas. That's it. And all these 16 guys were sending a copy of their reports to him, and he was reading them. And he took over from a guy who had been head of foreign operations for a while. And he's reviewing the old notes, and he looked at me, and his face was like red, and he said, and within an hour, I realized that the CIA, that Air America was the biggest drug dealer in the world, and the Kuomintang Chinese were the biggest drug dealers in the world, and the CIA was underwriting the whole goddamn thing. He said, so I went to the boss, the enforcement assistant, with these memos, and I showed them to him. And he said, Forget about it, John. And, so there were guys that cared. But again, they're in an impossible situation. There were people that told me, guys who'd been in the Bureau of Narcotics in the Middle East, in Beirut, and Paris, and Rome, and they told me the Mossad was one of the biggest ran one of the biggest drug trafficking networks in the world out of Lebanon, and also it had all these major heroin traffickers, which it was using as informants. And they would say to me, that's the truth, but I was never allowed to write it in a memo, because the minute you say something bad about the Israelis or the Mossad, your career is over because you called an anti-Semite. And so they couldn't even report to their own headquarters about the Mossad involvement in the heroin and of course the arms trafficking, which is the other half of that equation. Wherever there's arms traffickers, there's drug traffickers. The people like bringing drugs into Syria and drugs out, or Afghanistan, or any place. Planes don't fly back empty. They fill them up with something.
Yeah.
And so if you want to learn about all that stuff, that stuff's in the Strength of the Wolf and the Strength of the Pack. I kind of try to sum it up in that section in the new book about the CIA and drug trafficking. But that's how I got to know about it. And again, I just lucked out because I came from left field.
No, absolutely. And again, I encourage people to check out Strength of the Wolf, Strength of the Pack. Strength of the Wolf is great because you talk at length about George White, who we could probably do an entire episode, 2 hours on. He's a fascinating, terrifying individual. But anyway, Doug, before I let you go, where can people go to find your work and to purchase a copy of your new book, The CIA as Organized Crime?
Well, for all my old books, just go to my website, www.douglasvalentine.com. I also have them up on Facebook. You can go to Facebook and like them. They may tell you how to buy them there. Maybe not. And my new book is published by Clarity Press. Diana Collier, who's the person who actually shamed me into writing this book and beat me into doing it. But I'm glad she did, and she really made it easy for me to do it. But that's where the new book is, Clarity Press.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much for sticking around, especially for almost a half hour extra. And love to get you back on the show again in the near future. So take care for now. Great. Excellent. We will talk again very soon. So thank you so much. And once again, everybody can go to DouglasValentine.com if you want to pick up a new copy of his book. So Doug, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Pierce.
Excellent. All right. Well, just a fascinating guest. As I said, I have been dying to get Doug Valentine on the show for a while. And I think I was actually I had hesitated in getting Doug on because I was I'll freely admit it, a little starstruck by Doug. He's such a big deal in the alternative media, and he was such a big deal for me, and he's like one of those guys that first got me into certainly looking at the sort of early years of the drug war. And as I said, Strength of the Wolf is like amazing. Literally every page is, there's like some new sort of fact that you learn about that. So I encourage, people all the time to check out, Doug's work and check out also, go back and, look up some of, Guillermo Jimenez has done some tremendously great interviews with Doug in the past. So if you go to, tracesofreality.com, I'm pretty sure, Guillermo has still got all of those, interviews, archived somewhere, but check out some of the old episodes on Traces of Reality, because there were just some really, really interesting stuff. A lot of stuff on the Phoneix Program, where Doug is sort of talking about, the Phoneix Program as it relates to the war on terror. And the war on terror is just sort of the latest iteration of what began back in Vietnam. So, definitely check out all that stuff. Also, if you go to Doug's website, and if you click on like the Phoneix Program link, he's got a ton of articles about it. He's got some really great interviews. I'm just looking at it right now. He's got some old interviews with Abby Martin that he did. He's got some really great video discussions and things like that. So lots of great stuff to check out. I'm awaiting my copy of the CIA's Organized Crime. It is somewhere in the mail. And I was kind of bummed out that I didn't get to read it before I spoke with Doug. But I hope everybody enjoyed the interview that we did there. And got something out of it, especially if you've never heard of Doug Valentine or you're new to the show. I know we get lots of new listeners, so it's always good to expose them to people like Doug Valentine. So, what else have we got going for the show? Well, I guess a couple quick things. Once again, I do really want to give a huge shout out to Hugo Turner. He was the co-producer on this episode. Hugo actually put me in contact with Doug, and Hugo runs the website Anti-Imperialist U, and you can find that at antiimperialistu.blogspot.com. I will link up to that in the show notes. He's also on Twitter at Hugo Turner 1969. Great writer. He has been a huge supporter of the podcast from the very beginning. Hugo was like one of my first like serious listeners, and someone we used to talk quite a bit more on Twitter, but I've just sort of been lazy about responding to people. But always a big supporter. Great stuff on his website. Definitely a lot to check out. As I said, I'm trying to get him on. He's got an article. If you look it up, it'll be under the 2016 and then under December on the blog archive, and it is Ted Shackley, A Life in the CIA. And he actually, at the very top, he's got with special thanks to Doug Valentine. Anyway, I'm going to try and get Hugo on to talk about Ted Shackley, talk about his research into him, his article, and it was a shame we didn't have Doug on for more because he actually knew Ted Shackley and met him before. So really, really fascinating. And I'd love to kind of explore that a little bit more and stuff. But anyway, I'm positive we'll get Doug back on the show to talk about Ted Shackley and more. So definitely look out for that. Also, check out Hugo's stuff. A lot of great articles on there, and he writes it pretty frequently. At least a couple articles every month. He's got a really cool series on Iran-Contra. If anyone is interested in that, lot of good stuff. And Hugo is very much research based. It's not everything. He's like always reading a new book. I mean, he must read like a book, I don't know, like every fucking week or something. He's always got tweeting out pictures, new books and stuff like that. He reads a lot more than I do. I'll say that. But anyway, that's something to look forward to. Hopefully we'll get Hugo on maybe, late in January. Next week, Tuesday, we are going to be talking with our good friend Tom Secker because of course, this Sunday, the 15th is coming Sunday. January 15th is the season premiere of the brand new season of Homeland. I think it's season 6 of Homeland. So that is premiering this Sunday on Showtime, but also you can find it if you don't have Showtime. You can find it on like a million streaming sites if you Put Locker or Watch Series or you can just search Homeland and then the season and the episode, and you can put in bunch of different hosting sites. Gorilla Vid is one, MovPod is another one. So that'll be on Sunday, and Tom and I are going to be discussing that episode. And we're going to be talking, I think, about the series as a whole, what we expect to see happening this season in this episode. And then we're going to figure it out exactly. I think we want to do probably at least 2 more episodes. We're definitely going to have an episode summing up the series. And then I think we'll do like a mid-season episode as well. But, for people that, anyone out there who hasn't seen Homeland, I would encourage you to watch it. You don't necessarily need to like follow every season exactly because they sort of do like a season reboot most of the time, although I do think this season will have some callback to the last season. But of course, you can also check out Tom and I have covered. We did an episode. Might have been on Clandestine. I can't remember now off the top of my head. I think we recovered the first 3 seasons. So the Brody saga. For anyone out there that, they'll know what that means. But all the episodes all the seasons where Brody is still alive. We covered that. And then of course, last year we did an episode by episode, sort of mini series on Homeland. So you can also check that out if you want to get yourself psyched up for this new season of Homeland, which will be really interesting because it's in New York. So of course, always fascinating. And it'll also be featuring Hillary Clinton, more or less. This season revolves around a female junior senator from New York being elected president of the United States. So obviously Hillary Clinton. The producers, Alex Gansa and some of the other producers and writers over there must have been beyond pissed off when Trump won. 'Cause I'm sure they were definitely crafting. They crafted the whole damn season around Hillary Clinton being elected. So that'll be really fascinating to see what are the storylines that they're putting out there. People will recall last year the season of Homeland was eerily predicting events, sometimes days before they happen. Just 24 hours or so before it came to pass, and not obviously not like exact replicas of what was on the show, but people will remember there was one episode where a plane carrying a possible Syrian defector, who's a general, who the CIA is able to, move to their side. He is, flying away. I think he's in Switzerland or Austria or something. He's flying away and then the Russians blow up his plane. And then basically the next day, it was Monday, maybe Tuesday. Of course, we had the, bombing of a Russian airliner over Egypt. And there were lots of other sort of eerie similarities and stuff. So it'll be really fascinating to see if there's anything like that going on this season. Will a Trump presidency have the same sort of storylines as Homeland? That'll be really kind of fascinating to see because, as I said, especially last season, but even the season before that, there was such what's the word? They were so in line between reality and the show that you do sort of wonder, are they crafting geopolitics to fit in to this fictional television show, or is a fictional television show that good at predicting these sorts of events? So it'll be fascinating to see if anything that happens on Homeland comes to pass with Donald Trump in the White House. So that's an episode to look forward to. I guess, fill up a little bit more time with some upcoming episodes. I am working on getting Aaron Smith-Levin onto the show. Faithful listeners will remember Aaron from a while back. I'm trying to remember exactly what episode it was. I'll try and pull it up as I'm talking right now. But Aaron, of course, is a former Scientologist. He was a member of the Sea Org. Aaron was born into Scientology. And we had him on the show this must have been a while back. I'm just trying to pull it up right now as we talk. And of course, this is taking me a little bit longer. Oh, so 9 months ago, all the way back on episode 48 of the when this was still a podcast. So quite a while ago, we had Aaron on talking about growing up in Scientology. Of course, Aaron Smith-Levin runs the YouTube channel Growing Up in Scientology, which is a must watch YouTube channel. That's on my website, even under the sites to follow. I've got the Growing Up in Scientology. Really great stuff. He does a really fantastic video series with Mike Rinder, also another former staff member and Sea Org member of Scientology. Very high up, Mike Rinder. And they do a great series talking about what it's like growing up in Scientology, as opposed to someone who is sort of brought into Scientology, someone that's recruited in. And of course, Aaron Smith-Levin has been featured on Leah Remini's show on I think it's on A&E, which is going after Scientology. It's a really good documentary series. I know it sounds, cheesy. It's A&E, and people think, oh, Leah Remini is like, King of Queens, and she's kind of like a silly, but, that show is, I cannot stress how important Leah Remini's show is in actually going after Scientology. This is way bigger than Going Clear could have ever been. Because Leah Remini is a, very well-known Hollywood actress. Middle America knows who she is. They remember her from King of Queens. She holds a lot of weight. She's very outspoken, and she's very media savvy. So she, of course, that people will remember she had this very public breakup with Scientology. But then she's sort of quiet for a little while. After her sort of initial thing, she did like I don't know what it was, like 2020 or something like that. She did like her big kind of, it wasn't Oprah, but like her Oprah interview. Maybe it was Barbara Walters or something. I can't remember. But, she did her whole interview talking about how, she's brainwashed and how, horrible Scientology was. But now, she does, this, television show, documentary, series. And I'm trying to pull up exactly, what the name of the show is. Right. It's Leah Remini, Scientology and the Aftermath, and that is on A&E. And it is definitely, if people aren't aware, it's making quite a buzz, amongst Scientology, to Scientology watchers. People should definitely go check it out. I think Leah Remini's also, relaunched. And as we go, this is the 50th cop car outside my window. I think she's actually relaunched her sort of not lawsuit, but her legal proceedings into the whereabouts of Shelley Miscavige, who is David Miscavige, the chairman of the board of Scientology. That is his wife, who's not been seen publicly in something like 6-7 years, I think. She's somewhere under lock and key. This show is huge. And Aaron has been on the show. I think he's on a bunch of episodes. I know he's on episode 6 where they talk about auditing. I think he's also on episode 8, which is I don't believe is out just yet. And he knows Leah quite well, and it would be amazing to get her on the show. I doubt that's going to happen, but we might be able to get Mike Rinder on through Aaron, maybe some other people. So I'm working on getting Aaron Smith-Levin on the show. Hopefully that'll happen end of January, maybe the 31st. If not, then we'll definitely have him on early on in February. And I'm also really excited. I've got another really interesting episode in the works right now. I'm going to hopefully be talking with Frank DiMatteo, who is a writer and a former mafioso. He grew up in the mafia. And Frank DiMatteo is also a writer. As I said, he wrote a book called The President Street Boys Growing Up Mafia. And Frank is actually from my old neighborhood. He grew up in South Brooklyn on President Street, which is where I grew up as well. The neighborhood is known as Carroll Gardens, which is sort of like a I mean, that's how I ostensibly knew it, although, my parents always called it South Brooklyn. But, Carroll Gardens is like a real estate term. But anyway, he was part of the President Street Boys, which was like a mafia street gang. He was, Joe Gallo, Crazy Joe Gallo, who again also grew up, very close to where I live, just a few blocks away, actually. Crazy Joe Gallo was this sort of, it's silly you say larger than life. He really was larger than life. He was this sort of almost like the counterculture figure of the mafia. He his favorite writers were Camus and Sartre. He was he was like, if you look up pictures of Joe Gallo when he testified at Congress, he was like a hipster before that was even like a term that you would think of. And he tried to revolutionize the mafia in a lot of ways, but he was very well read. He was very good friends with Jerry Orbach, of course, of Law and Order fame. And Jerry Orbach played a sort of fictionalized version of Joe Gallo. But Joe Gallo he was also sort of like part of the literati of New York. He moved to Greenwich Village, back in the 60s. That's where he lived. He used to hang out, all over the village, and he would, with beatniks and poets and stuff like that. While he was also this psychotic, mafioso. He worked for the Profaci family and then later initiated a very violent, gang war, sort of internal mafia war within the Profaci family. Joe Gallo is the guy who killed Anastasia, the head of Murder Inc. That's Joe Gallo, is the guy who actually knocked him off. The term "going to the mattresses" comes from Joe Gallo. Bob Dylan wrote a song about Joe Gallo. He's very, very, this very charismatic figure. Joe Gallo was Frank DiMatteo's like godfather, like actual godfather or something, like at his christening. And Frank DiMatteo has written this book, as I said, The President Street Boys, Growing Up Mafia, all about his life, within the sort of Gallo crime family. His father, I believe, was a bodyguard for Joe Gallo. And when Frank was like a kid, like 13, he started driving for various mobsters. He was like a driver for various mobsters. And he grew up like all over my neighborhood. Just if you go to like Amazon, you look at President Street Boys. If you go to like, I think he's got the introduction up there. If you scroll down somewhere, he talks all about, all the various places. I'll try and find it right now. Oh yeah, so he mentions Caputo Bakery on Court Street. Amazing. It's the best place for bread. When he talks about Mazzola, which is around the corner from where I used to live, which has got the greatest lard bread on earth. Court Street Pastry, which is, if you want to get cannolis, cheesecake, and ice, lemon ice. The best lemon ices you're ever going to get. Rainbow Vegetable Market, which is a small little family-owned market. Those were our neighbors. I grew up with all of Stephanie, all their those were like good friends of ours. They ran the Rainbow Vegetable Market, which is no longer there. So it would be really cool just to talk to him about the neighborhood and whatnot, but also get a little insight into what it's like growing up in the mafia. So I'm in the middle of figuring out when I'm going to get him on. Really excited. People might also any sort of mafia watchers out there. If you've ever heard of Mob Candy magazine, Frank is the publisher of Mob Candy. And their website is still up, so you can go check that out. Really fascinating guy. There's some interviews with him online as well. So I'm working on getting that up and going. So some really fun episodes on the horizon. And I've got some other episodes here and there. I just this is something I wanted to mention too. I always, if you want to support my work, I know it's tough times financially, but you can support me for as little as $1 a month through Patreon. If you go to just patreon.com /Pierce Redmond, or if you go to my website, I've got links to both of my Patreons. You know, if you hate this show but you love Porkins' Great Game, or if you like Christoph, if you want to support Christoph, you can also go to that Patreon as well. And that is much appreciated. Again, you can support me and Christoph and that podcast for as little as $1. Of course, on the Porkins' Great Game Patreon, it's not you're only charged when we do an episode. Because we are so bad about putting out episodes. So you won't be charged every month, only when we do an episode. But if you want to support me monthly, then you can if you go to my website, I've got, just on the very top of the website, you can subscribe to either PPR or to PGG, and you just click on those links for as little as $1 a month. It helps me out a lot. I find it, I don't want to sound like a dick, but it's $1. I'm sure you can fork over $1 every month. You just consider the kind of crap that people are spending their money on. Throw me $1 if you can, or make a one-time donation. You want to just give me $1? That's totally fine as well. You can, you can do that on PayPal. I've got the donations button up there as well. So do that. There's also lots of great stuff on the. Just in the past week or so, we've put up some subscriber-only content. So the first important one being, of course, is Brian Heiss, who is a frequent guest on the show. He's been on the show twice before. He's also been on a subscriber podcast. He is the filmmaker behind O.J. Veritas, the Furman tapes. All through the month of January, Brian has allowed for all of my patrons, so anywhere from $1 to $50 a month, it doesn't matter. You will all get exclusive access to his documentary, O.J. Veritas, the Furman tapes, which has only been seen by a handful of people, including myself and Ed Opperman, and I believe Steven Singular has seen it. A few other people involved who were involved in the O.J. trial have also seen it. So that's a huge exclusive. There's and it's a great documentary. It's wonderful. If you don't know much about the impact that the Furman tapes had, the impact of the trial, and Brian, you can go back and listen to my interviews. The first one that I did with Brian was all about his documentary, and he contextualizes the way that race was a factor in that trial, because people can get a little hung up on it's all about race. That's why the jury voted the way they did. That's why this happened, and that it can get kind of overblown, especially when you start kind of peeling back and you start looking at cocaine and drug trafficking and some of the sort of shady stuff that was going on in the background in the LAPD and in the law enforcement and various other organizations like that. But race was very important, and Brian, I think, has done the best job at showing why that's so important. And he plays lots of long clips from the Furman tapes, and he gets into Laura Hart McKinney, her background, who was the screenwriter who interviewed Furman over the course of many, many years, including just up to the trial, where Furman boasted to McKinney about how important he was, how without him and the glove that there is no case. And Brian goes into McKinney was, interviewing Furman about MAW, Men Against Women, which was this sort of, secret society within the LAPD that was out to intimidate women. So he gets into a lot of stuff. So if you become a subscriber anytime through the month of January, just if you go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond and you just scroll down on my page, you will see the PPR exclusive O.J. Veritas, the Furman tapes, and you can, if you click on that, there is a private, you just scroll down. Brian's got a really great little description about the film and where to contact him as well. He's always open for emails, and if you have any comments or critiques or things like that. But if you scroll down, there'll be a private link to Vimeo where you can watch the film. And please, don't share it around. This is a perk. And Brian is nice enough to do this as a promotion for me, and my subscribers. So, really exciting. Definitely go check that out, if you have not already. I also, recently, put up a really, fun interview I did with Chuck Ocelli for his members. And it's all about, South Park, season 20. So if you didn't get enough of me and my sister talking about South Park, then go check out me and Chuck Ocelli talking about South Park. And that's at the top of the Patreon post right now. Chuck Ocelli members only South Park show. So you can go check that out. But I just wanted to say also that there's a lot of great content on Patreon, but thank you all so much for subscribing. And I just wanted to say that I made my first sort of serious Patreon purchase. I got a couple of books in the mail. One of them is, of course, Doug's book, the CIA's Organized Crime. But I also got a copy of Frank DiMatteo's book, The President Street Boys, and a book that I've been dying to read, which is Aberration in the Heartland of the Real, The Secret Lives of Timothy McVeigh, which is by Wendy S. Painting. And this is a book I've been dying to read. It is all about Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bombing, and we are definitely going to try and get Wendy on the show to discuss her book. It's a huge, thick book, which I can't wait to get into. If people aren't familiar with Wendy Painting, I think Ed has had her on the show before, but she was a co-producer and co-writer on the documentary film A Noble Lie, which is the best, hands down, without a doubt, hand on the Bible, the best film on the Oklahoma City bombing. A Noble Lie is available on YouTube. The directors have put it up there, so if you just I think if you just were to search on YouTube for A Noble Lie, you would definitely find a copy of it or version. I think it's like the first hit that you'll find. The best film, without a doubt. James Lane, Chris Emery were the directors behind it. And Wendy was a huge, as I said, she was a co-producer and co-writer, and she's done. She's a PhD in American Studies, but she has written a lot on the Timothy McVeigh, and this book is sort of like the magnum opus of I would say probably of this sort of alternative research into Timothy McVeigh and into the Oklahoma City bombing. Sort of like the hidden biography. And it's got a really, really wonderful artwork. But I purchased this with Patreon money. So thank you all so much. And, this is why it is, worthwhile to support me, because I get to, buy these books. I don't have to kind of scrimp and worry about, I don't know if I can do that. Now I can buy all the books and, research material that I want, and we can get some really great guests on the show, such as Wendy Painting or Frank DiMatteo or Doug Valentine or other people like that. So again, if you want to support me, if you want to get some really fun, interesting guests on the show for as little as $1 a month, you can do all of that. So I thank everybody who does do that. And of course, please, if you can, please become a subscriber to American Freedom Radio, because I wouldn't be doing the show without them. So you can do that on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. As I said, I will be coming to you next week with Tom Secker to discuss the new episode of Homeland. So please watch that. And until then, I will talk to you very soon.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.